I would have been very easy for me to just not have this message this morning, because sometimes our way of escape is to not get involved at all. And that's the worst thing we can do right now, is to return back to the apathy that we've seen so many times. This is not the first time we've seen demonstrations. This is not the first time that we've seen what's going on, maybe not at this level, but it seems like it happens and then we go right back to where we were. I'm not sure it's going to happen that way this time. This is different. This is tremendously a different time. And we are absolutely experiencing something that is happening very quickly. It's not happening through months and months of changing legislations and voting people in and voting people out. That will come. But this is something that's happening every day. Something is changing. Laws are changing. Administrations are changing. People are leaving that need to leave. And people are coming forth that need to come forth. So this is truly the great shift that we've talked about so many times, as we see the patterns that make us who we are as a people, as a world, as an earth, is changing its own inner patterns and repatterning itself to take on different form as we move into the next level of what it means to be human. There's nothing more than I love than Eckhart Tolle's book on the new earth. He hits it as well as anybody when he calls this the time in which the pain body is showing itself. And it thinks it's showing itself because it's hungry. And the only thing the pain body wants is fear and anger and all of those lower base parts of nature. But I think there's going to have to be those that also meet this thing with love and light. And it's the love and the light that's going to diminish the anger. So today, let us represent a people out of a people. A city set on a hill. And that is what I think we've all been being prepared for so long on the path that we've been in what we call metaphysics or new thought. And I think we're moving beyond new thought right now to consciousness. This is different. When you have new, you got old. But when you just have consciousness, you have neither good or evil or good or bad, but you have the isness of God. And when you're in the isness of God, anything is possible. But the minute you start labeling it this or that, then you're boxing it in somewhere. But if we just return to the ground of creation, which is consciousness itself, before it becomes perceived as good or bad, but just is in this state of isness. You know, when Jesus went, I was 12 years old, and they wanted to take him back to home, he said to his mother and father, "But I must be about my Father's business." And I believe he was saying my Father's business is isness, the I amness. And for us, we've got to return to that sacred ground before we allow ourselves to get into our own egos, in which we begin to have perceptions based upon outside signals that society, culture, media give us. Be careful of that, because it will lead you toward itself. And that's not a good thing. Don't let that outside of yourself be that which forms your point of view of the world and what's going on today. That is reserved inside of you. Every one of you have already been placed with everything that you need to be able to go through all of this and not lose yourself consciously. Don't let, if emotion reigns, it knocks you out consciously. If anger reigns, it knocks you out consciously, and you get into reactive mode. And you start saying things and doing things that you would not have done if you would have been mindful, or if you would have thought it through, or if you'd have really detached yourself from it. And if you don't do that, then it just knocks you out and you go into reactive mode. And the more we react, the more that we feed those who are reacting. So we have to be those across the world, actually, who understand the very heart of things, we have to realize that we are here to be the intervention. The intervention. And to do that, you've got to stay in touch with that innate love that is within you. So, I wanted to talk, and the reason I'm doing it is because I've been saying for so long that I think the ministers, pastors around the world have a part to play in the fact that many of us still gather together in our communities, in our churches, synagogues, cathedrals, whatever it is, mosques, that we join together in groups of people. And therefore, we need to have a voice in this time of transformation that is going on. So I've done a lot of just research and studying. This is not a new subject for me. In fact, a year ago, I talked on this subject of racism. And during that time, I'd done a lot of actual research on it. So I want to get past just a few things that I have come up with that, and I want to say that I may say things wrong, I may not say it right to you. This is a touchy subject to talk about. So please hear my heart in where this is. But one thing that stood out for me is a quote that says, "Race is a social concept, not a scientific one." That has been pretty much proved, and I have a lot of the research today that we all share with the same blood, actually. And let me give you a good scripture for that, if I can find it. I have it here, that I really like, and it's in Acts 17 and 26. "And he hath made us one blood, all nations of mankind, for to dwell on all the face of the earth, and hath determined the times before appointed and the bounds of their habitation." I'm going to read that again. That's a powerful scripture, isn't it? Oh, you got it up there. Yeah, look at that. One more time. "He hath made us one blood, all nations of mankind," let's say, "for to dwell on the earth, and hath determined the times before appointed all the bounds of our habitation." So where you've incarnated through, what culture, what race, everything is all in divine order. And we've got to accept that. And we've got to accept that when we tap into the mind of the Creator. See, that's what interests me. It's not enough to know Creator. I want to know the mind of the Creator. I want to know the intent of the Creator. I used to ask these questions all the time. God, why did you even create anything? What a mess. And God said, I'm going to interpret, I didn't create anything that's a mess. I created everything in my image and my likeness that is whole and perfect. You have taken what I've created and made a mess out of it. Whew, I said, wow, thank you. I don't know if I want to hear that. I want to be the victim. I didn't know I had any responsibility of how I have perceived creation in a way that I've stepped it down into something inferior. So anything that is seen as inferior is only a made-up perception in the minds of mankind. But it's not the heart of mankind. The heart, the core of mankind is always that which we call the one good, the all good, God the good, the Spirit. And even though you see people do horrible things, we need to be at a place that we can shift into that higher consciousness of ourselves and see through the world of appearance and to always connect with the God the good in all things. People do horrific, horrible things. And that is because we live in a world of free will, that we can choose to do what we want and how that we want to use our power. So I like this idea that I do think race is a social concept. I'm not sure that everybody has trouble with the color of people's skin. I think people are more about the culture of people that is different than them. And this is why I think that once we get through the phase of being so angry, that we need to go to the next phase, which is communication. We need to have deep communication and real communication. Because it's easy to come together and let's all try to be touchy with each other so we don't hurt anybody's feelings or whatever. And that's one thing that I've looked at here, of maybe having sort of a panel like of different people represented here that really could talk deeper about some of our deeper feelings and experiences when it comes to dealing with a world that is so diverse. But what I was saying, when I got into the mind of the Creator, the intent of the Creator, I found that the Creator has a mind that loves diversity. Look at nature. You know, the Native American says, if you really want to learn, go into the class of nature, the classroom of nature. Go watch nature, and nature will show you the heart of the Creator. And when you look at nature from a point of view, you see something completely different than the way we act and react as human beings, even though we've made ourselves at the top of the chain, so to speak. We're not leading this thing very well. We're not leading the course of the world very well because we've developed ourselves to have an ego mind. And we've let that ego mind control us and direct us in ways that has been not in synchronization with divine path and divine purpose in any way. So, also I talked about, I'm just going to do this real quick, the theory that modern Homo sapiens, everybody understands Homo sapiens? It's kind of a new word to religious people, but it should not be. It is a term of the phases of our human evolution, which Homo sapiens are what I call adolescent humans. Adolescent humans that began about 12,000 years ago. So actually, when it starts the story of Adam and Eve, it's actually what was a new beginning 12,000 years ago, and that was man moving out of innocence into developing identity. See, before then, man didn't really have an identity. Mankind just went by divine instinct. See, and when you was in that place, it was a whole different world because in that world, women were the feminine was much more powerful because it could create a physical body. It was seen as a divine act, a mystical act, and the woman was much more powerful. Men were less powerful until they figured it out that they held the sperm. When they understood they held the sperm to fertilize the woman, then there began to be a shift away from the feminine more to the masculine. And that's why you see all this happening in the early parts of the body, that you start seeing the male overtaking the feminine as Adam takes over Eve, and throughout the entire Bible until they make a God that is all male. Right? Which was Jehovah or Yahweh, which was an all-male God, and totally kept pushing the feminine down. Before Yahweh, you have 500 years of God Almighty, which is El Shaddai, the big and large-breasted one. That's what that means. The shad, if you look it up, means female breasts. So it says before Yahweh showed up, there was a feminine mother God. Well, that makes sense to me. I don't know how you're going to have a male without a female first. Males cannot produce themselves without the feminine, right? So it makes sense to me. You're going to have a mother feminine, lovely, wonderful God through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And then when kind of Moses comes on the thing, he goes into monotheism and makes up a God that is the God that we know as the all-male God. So, 12,000 years ago, we moved out of that state into the adolescent state. And what that was dominion over the earth. Read it. I give you dominion over the earth. That doesn't sound like partnership to me. Huh? So man got the dominion over nature. Up until then, man worked with nature. And nature worked with mankind, and all of a sudden man becomes the dominant one. And we know that how men, literally men, treat nature, they treat women. So as man went in and started raping the earth, they started taking the power away from women. And we've had 12,000 years of that. And it's during that time, think about adolescence. What do you do in your adolescent teenage years? Try to find yourself. You that are going through it with grandkids or kids today, you realize when they get 13, 14, 15 years old, they really don't know who they are because they have to develop a sense of self. And that's called an ego. But you have two sides of the ego. Never make all ego bad. There is a good side to ego because all ego means is identity. So you have two identities. You got an identity of you make yourself based upon what the world says that you are. Religion says you are this. You don't know you're born in sin until religion tells you you're born in sin. There is no child would ever know they were born in sin if they didn't sit in some religion or some culture that believed that at birth you are born in sin. It's a learned belief system. Right? So all of these things have been things that have been born to us. But on the other hand, we want an identity as a spiritual being. That part of us that's created in the image and the likeness of love and peace and joy, what we call God, is within us. So we have that part of the ego, which is the true part of ego, and then we got the pseudo-ego, in which we made based upon a self that we were not created to be, but a self which we became. And it says that. In the first chapter, it says that man was created in the image and likeness of God. And then it says in the next chapter, and man became a living soul. The living soul was not what God created, but it was a split of the soul, of the mind itself. And part of that mind stayed with the spirit, and part of that mind went with the body. And when we talk about the ego, we're talking about the part of the soul that has connected itself to the physical body. And the only way that it proves itself is by using the body. You see what I'm getting to? It uses the body. So therefore, what does it use? It uses anything that is different. Men and women are different, right? Races are different. All these things that are different, the ego uses to prove its agenda, which is its original sin. Anybody can tell me what that is? You've been in my classes long enough. What is truly sin as is identified, say, in Course in Miracles? It comes from a word that means missing the mark. But what is the agenda? Separation. Course in Miracles says that sin is separation. So anything the ego can do to separate us, it uses the body for it, because that's where we're all so different. And that's within races too. It's not this race versus this race. It's just within races that there's differences, disagreements. Sometimes it's different shades of color that makes a difference. There's lighter, there's darker, and even with Caucasian people, there's some people that are seen lower than other people and higher other people based upon how we interpret each other through our sensory perception. And that's the veil that has got to be so thin that it is rent from top to bottom, that we see beyond the veil of illusion. It makes all the difference. A quote that I found I really like from Lao Tzu. He says, if you want to awaken all of humanity, then awaken all yourself. If you want to eliminate suffering from the world, then eliminate all the dark and negative in yourself. Truly, the greatest gift you have to give is that your own self-transformation. So I want to make it clear that we need to realize that things are not really changed on the larger scale. It is changed on the individual scale. The old saying that the world shall be changed one person at a time, and it begins with me. So don't fall into, right now, the racial consciousness alone, but realize below all the race consciousness, where there is difference and separation, there is the deeper race consciousness. And it's not even the human race, it's the divine race. It is that which has individualized itself as all of us in this room. It is there. I personally, and I'm just going to talk from myself. I don't know if I've lived the black experience or not in another life. I've questioned the idea that maybe I have, because of my life has always been drawn to have African American experience in my life since I was a little boy. And I certainly wasn't raised with that necessarily, but I've always been the individual in my family. I've always been the different one. I've always thought differently. I've been the strange one. I've never followed the traditions of tribe and family or my own culture, but I've been my own person. You know what that's called? Being stubborn. David is so stubborn. If I heard that one time, I heard it 1,000 times growing up. But I was conscious born enough to have a mind of my own that transcend the mind that was being formed outside of me based upon my environment on the outside of myself. Now, even though I was raised in a home of the old Democrats, I'm sure my family was all Democrats, but they were the old Democrats. And it was the old Democrats that really were racial. It's not the liberals today that you see. That was an old Southern Democrat that really caused a lot of issues back in those days. But at the same time, I find it so fascinating that even though I was in a family of that, they themselves did not really buy into all of that, because there was always African Americans and there was always gay people. Always gay people. You've heard me talk about my aunt that was my pastor. She had this woman in Wichita, Kansas that was so in love with her that she would come, and she was the one that took care of all of us kids. We loved Aunt Maybelle. And she was very masculine and very obvious and sweet as she could be, but she was in love with my aunt. But my family accepted that. All the funerals that have been done, weddings that have been done in my family was through the gay minister at the Baptist Independent, it became Independent Church in town. So you see, you look at these things and you realize that there's a design. There's a design in the way that you're being molded for your dharma, for your purpose, for your calling. And even though I was what I'm saying is that it's kind of ironic that I'm raised in this southern Oklahoma culture, but at the same time there was a freedom and liberation in it and space to grow and be informed in a different way. So, when we live in states of fear, we forget the flow of love. Take that. When we live in states of fear, we forget the flow of love. When we create systems that are infused with racism, that end up teaching black teens, for instance, that they are only worthy of being feared and not worthy of being loved and protected, we darken the illumination of our own hearts. We shut off our own hearts. We fail to recognize over and over that Spirit joins us. Spirit joins us. We're tearing ourselves asunder when we stay in that place of such fear. And I want to say, I think that's something you got to look at also with the virus thing, is you've got to, if you're not ready to come out in person, come out in yourself out of fear. Reclaim your heart. Reclaim that innate love that is in you and keep it so that you don't become so overpowered, I guess, by the fear that is in you and been instilled within you. I've done my best every day to try to find something positive about this time that we're going through. And I think that there are, if you look at it from a spiritual point of view, that you'll see how we have been given a time to do very deep reflection on who we are. But we're tearing ourselves asunder, and we need to be careful of that. We need at some point to say, no, no more. I will not be completely knocked out by fear because the cost is too high. Systematic racism means that every 36 hours an African American is killed by police or a private security force. And probably it's less than 16 hours now. I think it's always been going on. I just think we've been made more aware and conscious of what's going on. So I'm talking as an incarnated white person about something that I'm not in that experience right now. Although I've got to step up and say that I do get a little frustrated sometimes that people don't realize what we as gay people have gone through. It's never mentioned. I know I'm seen as the privileged race, but trust me, if I've ever been honest with anybody, I've not been treated like a privileged person. I know what it is to hear people whispering about me. You know, even my own family who thought I couldn't hear them, how different David is. You know, I've been called a sissy. I've been called all kinds of things that I've heard about myself that made me feel bad about myself. I know what it is to be put out of a situation and not accepted because of it. So I'm not here to talk about that, but I'm saying sometimes I use the pain of that to connect with the pain of other people's experience that I'm not having. Is that okay? Yes. And when I first was introduced to the African American church, had a big impact on me, tremendously. And I've told you that story that my aunt used to go and sing in this little Church of God in Christ in Tulsa and take me with her. And that was my first experience. I was probably 13 years old, something like that. And I felt a connection that I did not understand. And it came through the music. Because the old African American music, the old black gospel, a lot of that was birthed from the pain, from being in the place. It was born in a people who expressed themselves, who were not allowed to express themselves. But they, for some reason, let them sing in the cotton fields. And they would sing and send each other messages. Hold on, there's a better day coming. You know, it's what heaven was. Heaven was a hope. That you too could live in a big house and walk down streets of gold. That sounded pretty good. One of these days, I want to take a vacation, cool my feet in the crystal water, and I won't have to work anymore. Wow, if you're out there working, being misused like that, it sounded good to go to church and know there's a better land. There's a better time coming. And a lot of those songs were birthed out of that kind of pain. And I heard that pain in that music, and I connected with my own pain that I was going through, trying to figure out who in the heck am I? I knew I had the anointing of God upon my life. I knew that. But they told me you can't have that and be a gay person at the same time. It was impossible. But I proved them wrong. And I proved myself right. That God loved me, God was with me, God was there for me. Oh, there's so much So I'm trying to talk not just out of research, but I'm trying to talk out of my experience. Nathan Rustine says most white Americans equate racism with the activities of the Ku Klux Klan, the skinheads, the neo-Nazis, who direct acts of violence at color of people. They don't realize that the disease manifests itself in more subtle ways. This is where you got to work. Even with us, this is why I want us to go deeper, because there's a lot of us that can fool ourselves and say, I'm not racist because I love all people and I accept all people. And sometimes I think that's all the ego, farther the ego wants you to go. It doesn't want you to do the deep work. The deep work. And we have to do the deep work to have truly transformation take place in our life. I can be surprised sometimes what can come out of the depths of my psyche and my subconscious at times. Things that I thought I'd taken care of because I changed the thoughts up here in the head. And the ego says if you change your thought up here in your head, it is real. And that is not true. You got to change where the thought comes from. You got to change the pattern that made the thought. That's why I'm so an advocate for subtle etheric work. Thank you for mentioning that today, that it's in your etheric blueprint. If you don't change the blueprint, things are going to keep making itself over and over the same way, even though you have mentally tried to change it, it'll go back to the pattern. And this is what we've offered for 20 years through the use of vibration and sound, because I believe that is the part that will go deeper than our mental body and will go into a much deeper place. The United States of America was founded by men who believed that people of color were inherently inferior to whites. They created a collective consciousness. Now that's what I want to get to. That we're not just dealing with this person who did that and this person who did that and this person who didn't do that. We're dealing with a consciousness that keeps showing up in the individual person. This is why it is so important that we do not let our brains generalize and use things like all white people, all black people, all women, all men are no good, all women are this. And we get into that, we have entered into the land of ego, the world of ego, because it only generalizes. I was sharing actually with Sandra yesterday, and I was saying that yes, I admit that if I'm walking down a street and sometimes I see an African-American young men with their pants down below their butt and all that kind of look and everything, I'm going to be a little concerned and fearful. And I thought about that. What am I fearful of? It wasn't necessarily them I was fearful of. I was fearful because of my own guilt for being white that they reminded me of. See how it works psychologically. We've got to look at this on a psychological level of how this all works. I thought they're going to do something to me because I'm white, and because white people did this, therefore they see that in me. Because I wanted to bring it back home to me, not them. I refuse to let this outer world always be the cause of everything about me. I have power. We talk about the power. I have the power. They don't have the power. Stars don't even have the power. Planets don't even have the power. And neither does governments have the power. The power that we give them is the power we have in ourselves. And we need to take back our power and reuse our power in a completely different direction than what it's been used in the old age, the old norm, whatever you choose to want to call it. So all of this that has been said of race has all collectively come into a collective consciousness, and from that institutions were born that reflected racial views. Schools, courts, legislative bodies, businesses, arts, sports, even churches were infected by this virus. Racism is a natural outgrowth of a multicultural society that's ignorant of the principle of the oneness of humankind. Humankind. So I had an epiphany this morning. And how can I explain the demonstration and the fervor of it and what is going on? And we know that the majority of people seem to want to demonstrate peacefully, but there's always those on the edge, the extremists that are out there, which is questionable sometimes where that all comes from, how much is orchestrated, whatever. And I thought, but we, in New Thought, we're kind of people who teach just love, peace, ooh, peace, joy, it'll all go away if I just think that way. But it's a time that even now we are being stirred in our soul. We, many people, are being stirred into action of some kind. And we all should be involved somewhere. It doesn't all have to be the same way, but we all need to be. And something came to my mind that sometimes love can be pushed to a point. And of course, I thought of Jesus. I'm going to use Jesus. Jesus is my archetype that I always go back to. So if I could see Jesus the Christ as the manifestation of God's love in the human experience, I want to read you something about Jesus, the archetype of God's love made manifest. Jesus, love, entered into the temple courts and drove out all that were buying and selling there. He overturned the tables of the money changers and benches of those selling doves. It is written, he said unto them, my house shall be called a house of prayer, but you make it a den of robbers. I used to read that and think, that's not my sweet Jesus. My loving Jesus, who was always gentle and so kind and so loving. What in the world happened that Jesus went into the temple, took out a whip, and drove out, turned over tables? And I thought even love can be driven to a place where it's got to change the way it demonstrates itself. Are you with me? It says, for those of you saying you want to spread love in this time, research is love. How many of you have taken this time off to go deeper into what you have believed and you have taught? Research. I love the word. Any word that has an R-E in the front of it means search again. Re is again, always, again. Search. Advocacy is love. Having hard conversations is love. You don't have to always agree with each other and not tip the boat and all these things to make everybody okay. Sometimes love can show up as hard conversation. You want to spread love? Listen to those people in pain. I've done my best. When I took this community and realized that I was taking an integrated group of people, I made sure that I connected the best I could with those that were different from me. I wanted to hear the story. I wanted to see where people have been and where they are. And I do see us as a unique people. And I think it's important that we hear each other. I love hearing people's stories that's willing to share with me the depths of their story, of where they've come from and how they got here. I hear you. I believe in your humanity. I will fight for it, no matter what it takes. That is the most loving we can be. Many times. It's so important. I love Galatians 3:29. It's always very powerful because you can understand the majority of all the Bible is still based upon a racial point of view. It starts out as a racial book. God, Jehovah, the Old Testament, is the God of Israel. Was not the God of anybody outside of who was called an Israelite. In fact, those people were called Gentiles. Gentiles was not a good name. It's not a good name to be called a Gentile. They also called Gentile dogs. That's before they realized how powerful and smart dogs are. They weren't very evolved when it came to the dogs. But they used it as a slur. It was their kind of N-word. Be called a Gentile. And because you did not have a God, you're my servant. You will serve me. I can show you in there where it even says you can't even enter into their sanctuary. And that went on for a long time. Actually, until Jesus. And tell you what Jesus did. Jesus grew in grace and wisdom, not in race and knowledge. That's why he was so enlightened. I'm going to say it again. He did not grow based on his race. And he had one. He was truly a Jew in the proper sense of using the word Jew. And the reason he was Jew was because he was a bloodline out of the tribe of Judah. Abraham, David, that's his bloodline. That's his bloodline. And he could have grown to heights unbelievable if he would have stayed in the bloodline of the race that he represented. But he grew in wisdom and grace. And he grew so much in grace, grace became greater than what? Race. And that's what Christ means. When he came to know the Christ that he was, he transcended race and entered into the grace of God. He was the grace of God made manifest. That's in my point of view. He's whatever he is in your point of view, but in my point of view, he transcended. And it was at that moment that he said to them, "You're of your father, who's now the adversary, but my Father seeks you to worship in spirit and truth." Jesus said, I got a whole different Father than you people do. He was very clear that you've been under the wrong one. But I'm here to show you and bring you back to the Father of grace. You've been under the Father of race. And it's very clear that at that point, it said that Jesus' grace overcame Moses' law. Right? So the Apostle Paul started out that way. He started out being racial and sexist. He persecuted the so-called Christians of God. He was a mess. Most people who've done the greatest things in the Bible were a mess. He was Saul then. He wasn't even Paul. He had a different name. He was Saul. He was a persecutor of anything different than what he believed in the Pharisee court that he was raised in, his parents. And he said that women should be submissive to men, and women should be silent in the church, and women should not look good and dress well, and all that kind of stuff is in the beginning of Paul's writings. But I kept reading. I kept reading. I wanted to follow Paul's path. See, where are you going, Paul? And here's where Paul ended up. After all of that, of putting women in their place and men being the head of the woman, and all that he went through, and that's all people see. But they didn't read any further. If they'd have just made it to Galatians 3:28, here's where Paul ended up. There is neither Jew nor Greek. There is neither bond nor free. There is neither male or female. For we are all one in Christ Jesus. People don't realize these people grew too. Don't you remember where you've come from, what you used to believe? And where you are today because you have been in an environment of growth and research and not locked into dogma and doctrine that's been going on for hundreds or thousands of years in your religion. That's how got us there. We all evolved in the last 100,000 years from the same number of tribes that migrated out of Africa and colonized the world. That's a quote from the New York Times. Dr. Harold Freeman says, if you ask what percentage of your genes is reflected in your external appearance, the bias is that we talk about race. The answer seems that we're in a range of 0.01% different. That's 1/100th difference genetically. So this is not a genetic thing. Martin Luther King's The Idea of Superior or Inferior Race is a myth that has been completely refuted by anthropology in its sense. And I could go on and on and on. What can we do? Educate ourselves about racism and privilege. Help the vote writers with ensuring greater access to basic voting rights for all citizens. If there's ever been a time to get involved in that, it'd be this time. Work to overturn punitive drug laws. Talk to your friends and neighbors. Get to know their hopes and their fears. Organize your communities to address violence and corruption in police, security forces, and prisons. Plant a garden in an empty lot. Feed people. Throw block parties. Make art. Educate children. Take time. Volunteer. Dance. Study. Raise awareness. Educate yourself. Help educate others. Speak up. Sit down. Stand tall. Ask yourself, what might a society based on love, mutual aid, and mutual respect look like? Which of my values uphold this? And organize toward that. We must do our part. The only failure is to stop trying. I think this has to happen. I think it's something that has been building for a long, long time, for decades, for hundreds of years. And I've told you, the body politic, as the physical body, can just take so much toxicity until it's going to pop out. You're seeing many, many decades and centuries of prejudice and misuse that are emerging on the body politic. And when it comes to someone like George Floyd, I have to see him through the archetype of sacrifice, for the greater good of many. It's kind of the idea of Jesus' I'm not comparing him, but I'm saying Jesus' idea of crucifixion at such a young age. I mean, how unjust did that seem? Somebody 33 years old, if, as the story goes, was beaten and taken to the cross and whatever, but we're still talking about him 2,000 years later. The contribution was amazing. And this man has made a global event become something that is in all of consciousness of the planet. It doesn't take away from my perception of an unjust act, a horrendous, horrible thing that was done. But horrible things are going to be done until they're not. Until there's a shift in the depths of consciousness itself, we will continue to do horrible things as human beings. This is our time to grow up. So I'm going to close with my personal experience. And I love telling this, so indulge me, okay? I know it's getting late, but I want to do this. As you know, as a young boy, again, probably about this time, 13, 14 years old, watching an old movie, it's an old movie then, now, but it's not one then, called The Imitation of Life. Still love the movie. If you've never seen it, you should look it up. Lana Turner. But in that movie was a cameo of Mahalia Jackson singing at the funeral. And when I heard Mahalia Jackson sing, I can't tell you what I felt, but I felt a connection. I felt a part of myself come alive that I didn't know I had. And I was so blessed by that experience that I became fascinated. And I had every Mahalia Jackson album in those days. And I listened to them because I wanted that feeling again that I got of someone singing from such a deep place. I'd never heard that in my church. I never heard people sing from the soul. I didn't hear people's soul singing, is what I should say. They weren't singing from the soul. The soul was singing. And it touched my soul in a way I'd never been touched before. So I would, and I knew Mahalia Jackson lived in Chicago, and I would listen to WLS. I could even get it in Oklahoma. It was a big radio station. And I listened to WLS at night. And I'd just think about Mahalia Jackson. I don't know. She was just on my mind and whatever. And I would cut out pictures of, I guess you'd almost call me an obsessive fan. I don't know. I just was fascinated. And that was my dream, my vision. When I started the first, and I'm proud to say this, first integrated church in Tulsa, Oklahoma in 1968. And it's pretty amazing. I did not know about the 1921 massacre that happened in Tulsa, Oklahoma, my own city I was raised in. Nobody talked about it. And even though I went, as I've told you, my first paying job was in an all-black African church in Tulsa, no one even mentioned it. I did not learn this until just some years ago of what went on in Tulsa, in Greenwood, where I went to church and played the organ. If you've not looked this up, maybe you should do it. There's a documentary on it. That's amazing what happened because some white woman said that a black man touched her in an elevator, something crazy. And the next thing, they were coming in like crazy. Anyway, when I started this church, I drew a lot of African American people. In fact, the woman I married, my wife-to-be, who had just lost her 9-year-old daughter with diabetes, and I was on the radio every day, thought I was black. And she said to her daughters, let's go visit the black church. And, of course, When she came, I was a 27-year-old skinny white blonde guy. But that's what we were. We were what we were. And in those days, we know how to do it. You know. And because of that, I was asked to come to Chicago by a group of people who rented the YMCA in downtown Chicago. And I started going, get this, every Tuesday, I flew from Tulsa to Chicago for $25 on Ozark Airline. Now, it was really $50, but a minister in those days got a break. For $25, I drove and ministered at this YMCA in Chicago. And one night after I'd preached, a little, very short African-American lady comes to me, just cute as a button. There's just something about her, you know, there's some people just, you walk into their aura, their presence. And she said, my name is T.V. Hall. Tavelda, I believe is her name. They called her T.V. Hall. And she said to me, I am the personal assistant of Mahalia Jackson. And she said, I went home last night and I said, Mahalia, you got to come and hear this white boy preach. And the next Tuesday, here comes Mahalia, incognito in a cab, comes in. Of course, I'm in awe, but I preached my heart out for Mahalia. I did not have a stitch of dry clothes on. I preached so hard. Back in those days, we preached hard. And Mahalia sang and all that. Then she said to me, you know, people who preach as hard as you do should have a little brandy. And I thought, oh my God, I'm going to go to hell. I did not drink any kind of liquor at all. I was told that was a sin. I was going to go to hell. But I went. And I downed that little bit of brandy or whatever it was. It burned. It was just awful. But yeah. Anyway, it started out a wonderful relationship. That was so amazing for me. But what I want to say is one of the things that I did, Mahalia had 2 beautiful condos in Hyde Park. She had a bedroom roped off where Martin Luther King slept when he came to town. And I would go over there after services, and it'd be way up in the night, and she would clean her own house, clean her floor, get her hands and knees. And during that whole time, she was talking to me and pouring out her life experience, even though she was the queen of gospel who sang before the Queen of England and all over the world, and told me she still had to go through the back door of the kitchen and was not allowed to stay in certain hotels. But she shared her heart with me, and I shared my heart with her. And I became known as Reverend Child. I'm saying that for a reason, because I'm proud of it. I'm saying it because you can manifest. The greatest desires of your heart can come true if you really believe. So I wanted to end my message with letting Mahalia sing to you, We Shall Overcome. And thank you for letting me indulge in this moment of this woman who made such a tremendous change in my life and shared with me her experience of being a famous but black woman in the 50s and in the 60s. And I so appreciate and love her for that. And also my dear Mother Hill, who was my spiritual mother. The church in Detroit, which was an African-American church, supported me for over 20 years. It was my greatest support. I've been mostly supported by African-American people most of my 40, 50 years of ministry. So what am I saying? When it comes to this racism, I don't think it finds a lot in me. I'm not saying it doesn't find something, but it doesn't find a lot in me. I don't feel bad. I'm sorry for what my ancestors probably did and thought, but I'm not responsible for that. And I'm inviting you that are white here, be the new white person. I'm inviting you that are African American, be the new African American person. We've got to come out. We've got to blossom out of what it means to be white or to be black or to be anything, gay or whatever. We've got to realize we're a new creation coming from a new collective consciousness that says we are one.
Time to let your heart light shine. Time to let your heart